Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The Galactic Convergence Station smelled like 1,000 different species trying not to offend each other, which is to say, it smelled absolutely terrible. Finn had been hauling cargo through the outer sectors for the better part of a decade, and he'd learned one universal truth. No matter how advanced your filtration systems, when you cram 50 different oxygen-breathing species into a rotating metal can, someone's lunch is going to make everyone else gag. He maneuvered his repulsor cart through the festival crowds, dodging a trio of Gelthians whose translucent bodies wobbled with what he assumed was laughter. The Unity Festival was in full swing, which meant the station's commercial district had transformed into a chaotic marketplace of cultures, cuisines, and catastrophically bad decisions. Banners in 24 languages proclaimed peace, prosperity, and partnership. Finn thought they should add a fourth P, pain in the ass. "Excuse me, coming through? Yeah, that's great. Love the tentacles. Very impressive," Finn muttered, weaving between a family of Corathians who'd decided the middle of the main thoroughfare was the perfect place for a reunion. His manifest showed 3 more deliveries before he could collect his credits and get off this station. Medical supplies to Bay 19, machine parts to the Mothri delegation suite, and a crate of something labeled fragile ceremonial objects that he was absolutely certain would break and somehow become his problem. The thing about being a cargo hauler, a legitimate one anyway, was that you became invisible. Guards waved you through checkpoints. Delegates ignored you. You were the background character in everyone else's story, and Finn had made peace with that years ago. Heroes got killed. Heroes got noticed. Finn intended to die old, unremarkably, probably complaining about the price of fuel cells. He rounded a corner into the festival's main market sector, and that's when he saw it. The Cub. Finn had hauled cargo for the Mothri before. Insectoid species, warrior culture, all very impressive with their chitinous armor and their multi-jointed limbs and their deeply inconvenient sense of honor. Their young were smaller than he'd expected, though. This one barely came up to his knee. It had the same iridescent carapace as the adults, shifting between deep greens and blues, but its limbs were still soft-looking, not fully hardened. Large compound eyes, probably designed to look cute, so predators would hesitate before eating it. It was working. The little thing was adorable, in an alien insect sort of way. It was also very, very alone. Finn slowed his cart. Not his problem. Definitely not his problem. The station had security, the Mothri delegation had handlers, and he had 3 deliveries and a schedule. The Cub chittered something, head swiveling as it searched the crowd. Its mandibles clicked in what even Finn recognized as distress. "Okay. No, come on," Finn said to himself. "We're not doing this. We're absolutely not doing this." He parked his cart against a vendor stall, locked it, and approached the Cub with the enthusiasm of a man walking toward a tax audit. "Hey, you, small person, where's your parents? Handler? Adult supervision?" The Cub's eyes fixed on him, all dozen or so facets catching the station's lighting. It chittered again, more urgently. "Right. Of course you don't speak standard." Finn glanced around. The crowd flowed past them like water around rocks, everyone absorbed in their own festival experience. "Look, I'm going to security. Yeah, I'm taking you to security. They'll have translators. They'll figure out where you belong." He reached down, half expecting the Cub to bolt or bite or do whatever Mothri Young did when threatened. Instead, It grabbed his hand with two of its smaller limbs and made a sound that could have been relief. Or hunger. Finn really hoped it wasn't hunger. Okay, okay. Security station is 2 sectors over. We can do this. This is fine. This is a completely normal detour that won't derail my entire day. The cub, apparently deciding Finn was now its designated guardian, chittered something that sounded almost cheerful and started walking, still gripping his hand. They made it maybe 30 meters before everything went sideways. The explosion came from the eastern corridor, a dull crump that Finn felt in his chest before he heard it. The crowd's ambient noise shifted instantly. Less chatter, more screaming. People started running, which was always a bad sign because panic was contagious, and nobody ever ran in the right direction. Of course, Finn said flatly. Of course there's a terrorist attack during the one festival I'm trying to work. He scooped up the cub, surprisingly light, maybe 20 kilos, and pressed against the nearest wall. His mind raced through options. His ship was docked in Bay 6, 3 sectors away through corridors that were probably now flooded with panicking civilians. Security would lock down the main thoroughfares, which meant side passages, maintenance tunnels, anywhere the crowd wasn't. The cub wrapped its limbs around his torso, mandibles clicking rapid fire against his shoulder. Finn could feel it trembling. Yeah, I'm not thrilled either, kid. He moved quickly, staying low, cutting through a service entrance he'd used for deliveries earlier that week. The maintenance corridor was dimmer, lit by emergency strips that cast everything in sickly yellow. His boots clanged on metal grating. Behind them, the sounds of chaos grew distant, replaced by the station's mechanical breathing. Air recyclers, coolant pumps, the ambient hum of a structure that housed 50,000 souls. Finn had made it maybe 200 meters when he heard the voices ahead. Not panicked civilian voices, controlled, tactical, speaking in clipped sentences in a language he didn't recognize, but whose tone he understood perfectly. Hunters who'd found prey. He froze. The cub's chittering had gone silent, which was somehow worse than the noise. Finn backed toward a junction, looking for an alternate route, but the voices were coming from multiple directions now. Coordinated. They'd cut off the side passages, probably following heat signatures or motion sensors. Of course you're important, Finn whispered to the cub. Of course you're not just some random kid. You're probably royalty or a diplomat's offspring or something equally complicated that's going to get me killed. The cub's eyes reflected the emergency lighting, unblinking, trusting. Damn it. Finn looked around the corridor. It was a standard maintenance junction, about 6 meters across, with exposed conduits running along the walls and ceiling. There were storage lockers built into the bulkheads, supplies, tools, emergency equipment. Not exactly a tactical advantage, but it was something. He set the cub down behind a cluster of coolant pipes. Stay, here. Don't move. Don't make noise. Just don't, okay? Can you understand that? No? Great. Fantastic. The cub started to follow him. No. Stay. It sat, but its eyes tracked his every movement. Finn moved to the nearest locker, popped it open. Maintenance supplies. A plasma torch, too slow to be useful. Cable spools, too awkward. A hydraulic pry bar, about 1 meter long, solid durasteel. He pulled it out. It had a good weight to it. Probably wouldn't do much against plasma weapons, but it was better than harsh language. The voices were getting closer. Finn could make out individual words now, still in that foreign language, but the intent was clear. They were sweeping the side corridors methodically, looking for the cub. Which meant this wasn't random violence. This was targeted. Someone knew there was a Mothri young at the festival, knew it had gotten separated, and was using the chaos to extract or eliminate it. Finn's cargo hauler brain wanted to run through the list of species who had conflicts with the Mothri. It was a long list. The Mothri were warriors, which meant they'd made enemies, which meant this cub represented leverage or revenge or some other political mess that Finn wanted absolutely no part of. His considerably smaller heroic impulse, the one he'd thought he'd successfully strangled years ago, pointed out that leaving a child to die, any child, any species, wasn't actually an option. I really, really hate the noble part of my personality, Finn muttered. 6 figures rounded the corner from the Eastern Passage. They were mixed species, 2 Korathians, their tentacles moving with practiced coordination. 3 humanoids Finn didn't recognize, wearing mismatched armor that suggested mercenary work, and 1 Gelthian whose translucent body made them almost invisible in the dim lighting. They carried plasma blades, sleek and deadly, the kind that cauterized as they cut. The lead humanoid, a scarred figure with cybernetic eyes, spotted Finn immediately. Said something in that foreign language, probably "move aside," or "give us the cub," or "you're already dead." Finn raised the pry bar. "So, funny thing, I'm having a really bad day, and you guys showing up isn't improving it." One of the Korathians laughed, a wet, burbling sound. The scarred humanoid raised their plasma blade, which hummed to life with a sound like angry wasps. "That's fair," Finn said. "Okay, let's get this over with." They rushed him. Later, much later, people would ask Finn if he'd had military training, combat augmentation, or some secret human fighting technique. The truth was significantly less impressive. He'd grown up in the rough docks of Europa Station. He'd been in about 100 bar fights, and he had the desperate creativity of someone who really, really didn't want to die. The first Korathian came in high, tentacles reaching for his throat. Finn swung the pry bar low, connected with what passed for the alien's knee, and used the momentum to spin away from the plasma blade that hissed through the space where his head had been. He slammed the bar into a conduit overhead, and superheated coolant sprayed across 2 of the attackers. They screamed. He didn't feel good about that, but he didn't stop moving either. The scarred humanoid was fast, closing the distance before Finn could recover his stance. The plasma blade came down in an overhead strike that would have split him from shoulder to hip. Finn threw himself sideways, felt the heat wash over him, and drove the pry bar into the attacker's midsection. Not enough to penetrate armor, but enough to knock them back. "Still alive," Finn gasped. "Still? Okay, that's a blade. That's definitely a blade." Pain exploded across his shoulder as one of the other humanoids got through his guard. The plasma blade cut through his jacket, through skin, into muscle. Finn roared, partly pain, partly rage, partly the realization that he was absolutely going to die in this corridor, and swung the bar in a wild arc that connected with something soft. The attackers staggered back. Finn pressed the advantage, but there were too many of them, too many angles of attack. Another blade sliced across his ribs, then his thigh. He kept fighting, kept moving, because the moment he went down, they'd reach the cub. And every second he stayed standing was another second for security to arrive, for someone to help, for something other than this. The scarred humanoid recovered, and Finn saw the killing blow coming. The plasma blade angled toward his chest, and he knew with absolute certainty that he couldn't dodge it. So he didn't try. Finn stepped into the strike, letting it take him through the shoulder instead of the heart, and brought the pry bar down on the attacker's wrist with everything he had left. The blade clattered to the deck. Finn grabbed it, ignoring the agony, and drove it into the scarred humanoid's chest. They went down together, and Finn rolled away, bleeding from at least 4 wounds now, maybe more. His vision was starting to tunnel. Not good. Very much not good. 3 attackers left. The Korathians and the Gelthian, circling him now, cautious. They'd realized he wasn't going down easy. Behind him, he heard the cub chittering, terrified but still hidden. "Come on, then," Finn said, swaying on his feet. "Let's go. I can do this all day." He absolutely could not do this all day. He could maybe do this for another minute, tops. The Gelthian rushed him, nearly invisible, and Finn only caught the movement because of the blade's glow. He spun, too slow, and felt the plasma cut through his side. His legs buckled. He hit the deck on his knees. Not over. Not done yet. Finn grabbed a handful of loose cable from the floor and whipped it toward the Gelthian, catching them across what passed for a face. They recoiled, and he used the momentum to launch himself at one of the Korathians, tackling them with the last of his strength. They went down in a tangle of limbs and tentacles. Finn found the plasma blade still clutched in his hand and drove it home. 2 left. Except he couldn't stand. His legs weren't responding. Blood pooled beneath him, far too much blood, and his hands were shaking. The last Korathian and 1 humanoid he hadn't noticed before. Where had they come from? Advanced slowly. They knew he was finished. Finn crawled backward, putting himself between them and the cub's hiding spot. His vision was graying at the edges. "Not today," he managed. "Not. You're not." The Korathian raised its blade. And then the cavalry arrived. Station security poured into the corridor from 3 directions, plasma rifles raised, shouting commands. The remaining attackers tried to flee, but they were cut off, overwhelmed by superior numbers. Finn slumped against the wall, his job finally done. The pry bar slipped from his fingers with a clang that echoed through the passage. The cub emerged from hiding, chittering frantically, and scrambled toward him. It pressed against his side, mandibles clicking against his torn jacket. "You're okay," Finn whispered. "Good. That's good." A security officer, Mothri, he noted distantly, knelt beside him, speaking rapidly into a comm unit. "Medical team, priority 1, massive trauma, human physiology." "The kid first," Finn said, or tried to say. His mouth wasn't cooperating. The cub wouldn't leave his side. It wrapped its small limbs around his arm and made a sound that, across all species and all languages, could only mean one thing. "Please don't go." "I'm trying," Finn mumbled. "Really trying." More security arrived, then medical personnel in white suits, carrying equipment that looked far too complicated. They were shouting things, medical terminology he didn't understand, and someone was cutting away his jacket to get to the wounds. Finn counted them, because his brain was still working, even if nothing else was. Shoulder, ribs, side, thigh, back. 2 separate cuts he hadn't even felt in the chaos. That was 6. No, wait. There were more. Another across his arm. One along his hip that must have happened when he tackled the Korathian. 8. 8 blades. 8 cuts. And he was still breathing, which seemed like cheating somehow. The medics were arguing about something, stabilization, transport. The Mothri officer was holding the cub back, trying to explain something in a language Finn couldn't parse anymore. His last coherent thought, before everything faded to comfortable darkness, was almost funny. Of all the ways to die, and Finn had imagined plenty over the years, from engine malfunctions to bar fights gone wrong to accidentally insulting a warlord's mother, being a hero wasn't even on his list. Heroes were idiots. Heroes got themselves killed for people they didn't know, for causes they didn't understand, for reasons that never quite made sense in the cold light of day. And yet here he was, bleeding out in a maintenance corridor, having taken 8 plasma blades for an alien kid whose name he didn't even know. The universe, Finn decided as consciousness slipped away, had a deeply irritating sense of irony. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him completely was the cub's face, compound eyes reflecting the emergency lights like tiny stars, and the Mothri officer standing at attention, hand pressed to chest in what looked like a salute. Then, nothing. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Waking up hurt. Not the sharp, immediate agony of getting stabbed. Finn had recent experience with that, unfortunately, but a deep, throbbing ache that suggested his body had spent considerable time putting itself back together and wasn't particularly happy about the effort. He opened his eyes to soft lighting that didn't immediately sear his retinas, which was considerate. The ceiling above him was curved, organic-looking, with bioluminescent panels that pulsed gently. Not standard station architecture, not human architecture at all. Finn tried to sit up. His body vetoed that decision immediately, and he slumped back with a groan that sounded pathetic even to his own ears. Finally awake. "Good. You were boring unconscious." The voice came from his left. Finn turned his head, slowly, because apparently his neck was also filing complaints, and found a Mothri sitting in a chair beside his bed. Female, he thought, based on the slightly smaller frame and the different pattern to her carapace. She wore what looked like medical clothing, simple and practical, but her posture suggested military training. "How long?" Finn's voice came out as a croak. "5 rotations. Your species heals slowly. Inefficient design." "Yeah, well, we can't all be armored insect warriors. Where am I?" "Mothri Homeworld. Medical facility. Northern continent. You were transported after initial stabilization on the station." She stood, moving to check something on a monitor that floated beside his bed. "I am Rio, your primary care nurse. Try not to die. It would reflect poorly on my record." Finn processed that. Homeworld. He'd been unconscious for 5 days and transported across who knew how many light years to an alien planet. The cub, Nikti, is he? Alive and insufferable. He visits daily, brings you gifts you cannot use, and talks constantly, despite knowing you cannot hear him. Ryo's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. You will meet him again when you are recovered enough to withstand his enthusiasm. Relief washed through him, surprising in its intensity. The kid was fine. That was something. That was worth 8 plasma cuts and a 5-day coma. Then Finn's brain caught up with the rest of his situation, and he realized his room was very, very crowded. They stood along the walls, motionless as statues, and Finn had somehow failed to notice them until now. 12 figures in ornate armor, chitinous plates decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the bioluminescent light. Each carried weapons, blades, plasma rifles, things Finn didn't have names for, and each stood with the kind of perfect stillness that suggested military discipline beaten into them since birth. "Okay," Finn said slowly. "Why are there a dozen soldiers in my hospital room? Did I accidentally commit a crime? Is this a very formal arrest?" Ryo followed his gaze and made that clicking sound again. "Those are not soldiers. Those are nest guard, elite warriors. They have been here since you arrived." "Why?" "Because you took 8 blades for Nikti." She said it like that explained everything. It did not explain anything. Finn stared at the warriors. They stared back, or at least faced his direction. It was hard to tell with compound eyes. I'm going to need more context. Maybe start from the beginning. Assume I know nothing about Mothri culture, because I know nothing about Mothri culture. Rio settled back into her chair with the air of someone preparing for a long explanation. Among my people, there is a sacred law called blade debt. When someone takes mortal wounds defending Mothri young, the entire warrior caste owes them a life debt. It is binding, absolute, cannot be refused or dismissed. That seems excessive. You nearly died. You took 8 separate strikes, any one of which could have been fatal. You had no obligation to protect Nikti. He was not your offspring, not your responsibility. You are not even our species. And yet, you fought 6 attackers with a maintenance tool and refused to yield even as they cut you down. Rio leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting his image a dozen times over. Among my people, such actions are considered the highest form of honor. Each blade you took has ceremonial significance. Taking 8 is unprecedented. There are stories, legends of warriors who took 3, perhaps 4. But 8? So you sent the honor guard to, what? Make sure I don't die and ruin the story? They are not here as guards. They are here as supplicants. You hold blade debt over them now, over all Mothri warriors. They wait to know what service you will demand as payment. Finn laughed. It hurt, pulling at healing wounds, but he couldn't help it. I don't want payment. I want to go back to my ship, haul my cargo, and pretend this whole nightmare never happened. The door to his room opened before Rio could respond, and 3 more Mothri entered. 2 adults flanking a smaller figure that chittered excitedly the moment it saw Finn. Nikti launched himself across the room with the kind of reckless enthusiasm only children possessed, and would have collided directly with Finn's injured chest if Rio hadn't caught him mid-leap. Gently, hatchling. He is still fragile. The 2 adults approached more slowly. The male was massive, even for a Mothri, his carapace decorated with military insignia that suggested high rank. The female moved with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in zero gravity. Pilot training, Finn guessed. They stopped at the foot of his bed and did something that made Finn deeply uncomfortable. They bowed. Full formal bows, heads lowered, limbs spread in a gesture of respect. Please don't do that, Finn said quickly. Seriously, I'm just a cargo hauler. I'm nobody. The male straightened. You are the one who saved our offspring. I am Imrax, General of the Nest Guard. This is Jilrun, my partner and navigator of the 3rd Fleet. We owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid. You really don't. I just did what anyone would... No. Jilrun's voice was quiet, but firm. Not anyone. The security footage showed 32 individuals pass the junction where Nikti hid. 32 who chose not to intervene. You were the only one. Finn didn't know what to say to that. Nikti squirmed free of Rio's grip and scrambled onto the bed, careful to avoid the medical equipment, and pressed against Finn's uninjured side. The cub made a soft, chittering sound, almost a purr. By the authority of the Nest Guard and the Council of Mothers, Imrax continued, his voice taking on a formal tone, I declare Finn of humanity under our protection for the remainder of his life. No harm shall come to him that we can prevent. His enemies are our enemies. His needs are our priority. This is blade debt. This is sacred law. This is done. The 12 warriors along the walls moved in perfect synchronization, striking their chests with their primary limbs in a salute that echoed through the room. Finn looked at Rio, hoping she'd tell him this was some elaborate joke, some test of human gullibility. She just clicked her mandibles and checked his monitor again. I did warn you. try not to die. It would be very inconvenient for everyone now. 3 days later, Finn was allowed out of bed, which he celebrated by immediately regretting every decision that had led to this moment. His legs worked, technically, but they had opinions about the whole walking thing, and those opinions were mostly negative. Rio supervised his first attempt at mobility with the enthusiasm of someone watching a disaster in slow motion. You are supposed to heal, not collapse. Sit down before you embarrass yourself. I'm fine. I'm great. Finn's knee buckled, and he caught himself on the wall. Going to sit down. The problem wasn't just the physical recovery, though that was tedious enough. The problem was that his hospital room had become what could only be described as a shrine. Flowers from species he couldn't name, carved tokens, weapons of all things, ceremonial blades laid at the foot of his bed like offerings, messages in 24 languages expressing gratitude, admiration, or, in one particularly confusing case, a marriage proposal from someone on a planet he'd never heard of. "This is insane," Finn muttered, poking at a crystalline sculpture that hummed when touched. "I didn't ask for any of this." "You became famous," Rio said, helping him back to bed with less gentleness than strictly necessary. The security footage was distributed across the Galactic network. You are now the 8-Blade Guardian. There are tribute videos, songs, one particularly dramatic Korathian opera that I do not recommend watching unless you enjoy 3 hours of interpretive tentacle dance. Finn groaned and covered his face with his hands. "Make it stop." "Cannot be done. You are a symbol now. Humanity's noble sacrifice, cross-species cooperation, the power of individual action against overwhelming odds. Politicians love you. You represent everything they claim to value, but rarely practice. I represent a guy who made a stupid decision and got lucky. Luck implies chance. You chose to fight. You chose to take those blades. That was not luck. That was character." Rio adjusted his IV line with clinical efficiency. "Also, you have visitors. Important ones. They insisted on meeting today, despite my medical objections." Before Finn could ask who, the door opened and 3 figures entered, escorted by Immerse. 2 were human, diplomats from the Earth Alliance, based on their formal attire and the way they moved like people accustomed to being the most important individuals in any room. The third was something else entirely. Reptilian. That was Finn's first impression. Scales that shifted from deep crimson to black, depending on the angle of light. Eyes with vertical pupils that tracked movement with predatory focus. The being moved with controlled precision, each step calculated, and wore minimal clothing that suggested either cultural preference or supreme confidence in their own physical capabilities. Immerse performed introductions with military brevity. "Finn, these are Representatives Talbot and Chen from your Earth Alliance, and Commander Ulmir of the Nexi Confederation." Finn knew enough about galactic politics to recognize that name. The Nexi were old enemies of the Mothri, not currently at war, but with centuries of bad blood and territorial disputes that occasionally flared into violence. Having a Nexi commander here, in the heart of Mothri territory, was like finding a shark at a dolphin convention. "Mr. Finn," Talbot began, all diplomatic smiles and practiced charm, "on behalf of humanity, let me say how proud we are of your actions. You've shown the galaxy the best of what our species can offer." "I'm going to stop you there," Finn interrupted, because his tolerance for political nonsense had been exhausted somewhere around blade number 4. "If you're here to use me as some propaganda tool, the answer is no. I'm not making speeches. I'm not attending ceremonies. I just want to go home." Talbot's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I understand your reluctance, but you must realize the opportunity this presents. Human-Mothrii relations have strengthened significantly since your heroic stand. There are trade agreements in negotiation, defense pacts being discussed. Great. Do those without me." The other human diplomat, Chen, stepped forward. "You don't have a choice. Your actions have political ramifications whether you acknowledge them or not. The least you can do is help us maximize the benefit." "The least I can do," Finn said, his voice flat, "is tell you both to get out of my hospital room." Imrax's mandibles clicked in what Finn had learned to recognize as approval. The two diplomats exchanged glances, clearly recalculating their approach, but before they could continue, Ulmir spoke for the first time. "They waste your time with platitudes." The Nexi commander's voice was sibilant, each word carefully pronounced. "I will be direct. Your actions have disrupted galactic politics in ways you do not yet understand." Finn studied the reptilian commander. "I'm listening. The blade debt is sacred among the Mothrii. Even we, their rivals, must acknowledge its legitimacy. This means that, for the first time in recorded history, a non-Mothrii holds significant political leverage over their warrior caste. You are, whether you accept it or not, a piece on the board now." "I didn't ask to be a piece." "No one asks, but here we stand." Ulmir moved closer, those predatory eyes fixed on Finn. "The Ravagers who attacked the festival were multi-species extremists, yes, but their funding, their coordination, that suggests something larger. Someone wanted that cub dead, or wanted to use his death to destabilize Mothrii-human relations." Finn felt his stomach tighten. "You're saying this was orchestrated?" "I am saying," Ulmir continued, "that your survival has inconvenienced powerful individuals. The unity your actions have inspired, the alliance forming between species who were previously neutral or hostile, this threatens certain established powers, and threatened powers respond. Is this the part where you tell me I'm in danger? You have been in danger since the moment you chose to fight. But there is something more." Ulmir glanced at Imrax, who stood rigid, clearly uncomfortable with this conversation. "There is a spy within the Nest Guard, someone feeding information to the Ravagers, someone who wants you dead before you can become a rallying point for galactic cooperation." The room went very, very quiet. Imrax's carapace seemed to darken, his entire body tensing. "That is a serious accusation, Commander. You claim one of my warriors has betrayed their oath?" "I claim nothing without evidence, but my intelligence network has intercepted communications, coded messages passing between someone in this facility and known Ravager cells. The content suggests another assassination attempt is being planned." Finn looked at the Nest Guard warriors positioned around his room, the same 12 who'd stood vigil since his arrival, rotating shifts, never leaving him unprotected. One of them was a traitor. One of them wanted him dead. "Why tell me this?" Finn asked. "What's your angle?" Ulmir's expression, if that term even applied to reptilian features, suggested something like respect. "My angle is survival. The Nexi have no love for the Mothrii, but we have even less love for chaos. The Ravagers want to tear down the existing order, and whatever replaces it will be worse for everyone. You represent stability, unlikely as that seems. Therefore, you are valuable. I'm a cargo hauler. You were a cargo hauler. Now you are a symbol, a political asset, and a target. Accept reality or die refusing it. Those are your options." Finn wanted to argue, to insist this was all ridiculous, that he was nobody special and everyone should just leave him alone. But the ache in his healing wounds reminded him that reality didn't care what he wanted. "So what do I do?" "You find the traitor," Ulamir said simply. "You expose them before they can act, and you decide whether you will accept the role fate has thrust upon you, or whether you will run and let others die in your place when the Ravagers return." The human diplomats had gone pale, clearly not expecting this meeting to take such a dark turn. Imrax looked torn between fury at the accusation against his warriors and the cold calculation of someone who recognized truth when he heard it. Finn closed his eyes, exhaustion washing over him. 5 days ago, his biggest problem was making deliveries on time. Now he was caught in some galactic political nightmare with spies and assassins and responsibilities he never wanted. "If I find this traitor," Finn said quietly, "what happens to them?" "Motheri law is clear," Imrax said, his voice heavy. "Betrayal of the Nest Guard carries only one punishment: execution. And if there's a reason, if they were blackmailed, coerced, forced into this?" Imrax was silent for a long moment. "The law does not account for reasons, only actions." Finn opened his eyes and looked at each of them in turn. The opportunistic human diplomats, the coldly calculating Nexi commander, the honorable but rigid Mothri general, and the ever-practical Rio who'd been listening quietly throughout. "Then I guess I better find them before you do." Finding a traitor turned out to be significantly harder than taking 8 plasma blades, which was saying something. Finn spent the next 2 days observing the Nest Guard warriors who rotated through his room. 12 total, working in shifts of 4, each one impeccably professional and entirely unreadable behind their chitinous armor and compound eyes. He tried conversations, casual questions, anything to get them to reveal something useful. It didn't work. They were trained warriors, not chatty security guards, and his attempts at interrogation were about as subtle as a cargo hauler trying to pilot a fighter craft. "You are terrible at this," Rio observed on the 3rd day, watching him fail to extract information from a warrior named Gixnor. "Perhaps stick to bleeding heroically. You are better at that. I'm open to suggestions. Stop looking for deception. Look for stress. A traitor carrying that burden will show signs, small ones, but present: nervousness, distraction, excessive attention to communication devices." Finn considered that. "You've done this before." "I was military intelligence before becoming medical staff. Career change after seeing too many warriors die from stupidity rather than enemy action." Rio's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "The traitor will also be anticipating your departure. Whatever they plan will need to happen soon, before you leave Mothri protection." That gave Finn an idea. A stupid, risky idea. But those seemed to be his specialty lately. He called for Imrax that evening, along with Jilran and the human diplomats who'd been lingering around hoping to secure his cooperation. When they assembled in his room, Finn made his announcement. "I'm leaving tomorrow, going back to human space, resuming my cargo routes. I appreciate everything you've done, but I'm not cut out for this symbol business. I just want my normal life back." The reaction was immediate and varied. The diplomats protested loudly about wasted opportunities. Jilran looked concerned. Imrax simply studied him with those unreadable compound eyes. "You are certain?" the general asked. "Completely. I'll attend a departure ceremony if that's required, say whatever formal goodbyes are necessary, but then I'm done." Imrax clicked his mandibles slowly. "Very well. We will arrange transport and a ceremonial send-off. It is the least we can offer for your service." That night, Finn didn't sleep. Instead, He watched the Nest Guard warriors through half-closed eyes, pretending to rest while tracking their movements. Rio had positioned herself in the corner, ostensibly checking medical equipment, but actually serving as his second set of eyes. 3 of the 4 guards on duty remained perfectly still, utterly focused on their protective duties. The 4th, a warrior Finn had learned was named Tokval, kept glancing at a communication device embedded in his forearm armor. Small movements, barely noticeable, but repeated every few minutes with increasing frequency. Stressed, distracted, exactly what Rio had told him to look for. Finn waited until the shift change at midnight, then called Immerse on a secure channel. "I think I found your spy, Tokval, northeast position. He's been checking his comms constantly since I announced my departure." The general's response was immediate. "Are you certain?" "No, but I'm certain enough to set a trap." The departure ceremony was scheduled for midday in the facility's central courtyard, a formal affair with representatives from multiple species, press coverage, and all the political theater Finn had been trying to avoid. His ship had been brought to the facility's landing pad, fully fueled and cleared for departure. Finn went through the motions, shaking hands and accepting well wishes, while keeping Tokval in his peripheral vision. The warrior maintained his position in the honor guard, perfectly professional, but Finn noticed the tension in his stance, the way his primary limbs trembled slightly. As Finn approached his ship, Tokval broke formation, just for a moment, and moved toward the landing pad's control station. Immerse and 6 other Nest Guard warriors were on him immediately, weapons drawn, surrounding him before he could reach the controls. "Stand down, Tokval," Immerse commanded. "Do not compound your betrayal with violence." The warrior froze, then slowly raised his limbs in surrender. General, The ship's life support has been sabotaged," Rio announced, emerging from Finn's vessel with a scanner. Slow leak in the oxygen recycler. Would have killed him 3 hours into flight. Tokval had access during the pre-flight inspection. Finn felt cold despite the warm sunlight. If they hadn't suspected, if he'd actually left? Tokval's carapace seemed to dim, his entire body sagging. "I had no choice. They have my sibling, my clutchmate. They said they would kill Rixall if I did not." Imrax's voice was hard. "Who has your sibling?" "Ravager Cell, Outer Rim territories. They have been holding Rixall for 2 cycles, sending proof of life, demanding I provide information about the human's location, his movements, his vulnerabilities." Tokval looked at Finn, compound eyes reflecting misery. "I swore my oath. I meant every word. But they have my family." The courtyard had gone silent. Every warrior present understood the impossible choice Tokval had faced. Duty versus blood. Honor versus love. Finn stepped forward, ignoring Imrax's warning gesture. "Where are they holding your sibling?" "Moonbase, abandoned mining facility in the corridor sector. But it does not matter. The law is clear. I have betrayed my oath. The penalty is death." Tokval lowered his head. "I accept my fate. I ask only that someone tell Rixall I tried. That I fought until I could fight no more." "Nobody's dying today," Finn said firmly. He turned to Immerse. "You've got elite warriors, advanced ships, and apparently unlimited resources devoted to keeping me safe. How about we use some of that to rescue this guy's sibling instead of executing him?" "The law can be flexible when circumstances demand it," Jill Runn interrupted, moving to stand beside Finn. "A warrior compromised through blackmail is not the same as one who betrays willingly. There is precedent for mercy when family is threatened." Immerse looked between them, his carapace shifting through colors that suggested intense internal debate. Finally, he clicked his mandibles in what Finn had learned was reluctant agreement. A rescue operation. Fast strike, minimum personnel. If we recover Rixal alive, Tok'val will face penance rather than execution. A cycle of service without honor, working to redeem his name. "I'm coming with you," Finn said. Every Mothri in the courtyard made a sound of protest. Ryo actually laughed, a chittering sound that suggested she thought he'd lost his mind. "You are barely healed," Imrak said. "You have no combat training. You will be a liability." "Probably. But I've spent 10 years navigating dangerous sectors hauling cargo. I know smuggler routes, pirate tactics, and how to think like someone operating outside the law. You need that perspective, and Tok'val needs to know someone's willing to risk something for his family, like he risked everything for his oath." Imrax studied him for a long moment. Then, incredibly, the general struck his chest in salute. "You are either the bravest human I have met, or the most foolish. Possibly both. Very well. We leave in 1 hour." The rescue operation was fast, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient. 6 Nest Guard warriors plus Finn, hitting the abandoned mining facility with the kind of precision that came from centuries of military tradition. The Ravagers never stood a chance. They found Rixal in a holding cell, malnourished and terrified, but alive. The reunion between the two siblings, Tok'val rushing forward, Rixal collapsing into his arms, made every risk worth it.